A very good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen. We are very honored to welcome our guest of honor, Professor Kenneth Mark, Director of Medical Services at Singapore's Ministry of Health. Gracing this occasion along with him is Dr. Cheong Wei Yang, Deputy Secretary of Special Projects at Singapore's Ministry of Health. I'm Lavanya, your MC for tonight, and on behalf of my colleagues at CALL, I would like to warmly welcome you to the inaugural Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture and graduation ceremony for our Graduate Certificate in Health Products Regulation. This lecture series commemorates our centre's first chairman, the late Professor Sir Alasdair Breckenridge, and is in honour of his visionary and exemplary leadership in steering our centre. To start off today's programme, we are very pleased to present a video on Sir Alasdair Breckenridge and the great impact he had on the international regulatory community. End call.
Alasdair will always hold a very special place in my life. I met him soon after I became the Commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and he was with MHRA. He quickly became a valued colleague, a wonderful mentor, and most importantly, a friend. With that twinkle in his eye and lilt in his voice, he was always teaching, whether it was about clinical pharmacology or how to advance the mission of regulatory authorities, or even about the inner workings of the Athenaeum Club. There was so much to learn. What a splendid person. And his legacy continues to inspire.
I had the privilege of knowing Alasdair for a period of 45 years. And for me, he was probably the closest colleague that I'd ever had. And he was an advisor, mentor, and really somebody that I looked up to. And he came to be a close personal friend. There is no doubt that I still miss him today because I could always ring him up and ask his advice, although at times I have to admit that he was quite challenging. In fact, his last challenge to me as founder of the Centre for Innovation in Regulatory Science was to suggest that we held a meeting where we looked at the topic, are medicines regulations fit for purpose today? The fact of the matter is, Alasdair will never be replaced as far as I'm concerned, and the world is a poorer place without him.
It is fair, it is great to remember Sir Alasdair Breckenridge. Alasdair has been, for so many of us, inspiring. For me, has been a coach, a teacher, and a friend. I will miss him forever.
It's a pleasure to say a few words as a tribute to Sir Alasdair Breckenridge. Sir Alasdair was a mentor of generations of regulatory scientists, both in Europe and in the world. I spent many evenings and days debating with him about Brexit, about evidence generation, about St Andrews, where he studied and my daughter studied. He truly was an inspiration to many of us.
I was a final year undergraduate pharmacology student, and I remember that there was a Professor Breckenridge in the UK who'd done some excellent work on drug metabolism, clinical pharmacology, cardiovascular pharmacology, and his work then, all those 40 or more years ago, is seen as being of international significance, and it still is. More recently, my closest relationship with Sir Alasdair has been with him as chair of the CIRS Scientific Advisory Council. And one of the things about Sir Alasdair is, as chair and as a member of that committee, he always approached those with a critical, courteous, but questioning mind about what areas that organisation could have the greatest value for industry, government, for regulators, and most importantly for patients. So in conclusion, if through CORE and CIRS and other parts of a broader international pharmacology and regulatory community, and the discipline of medicine regulations, we can carry on our roles, and we can continue as Sir Alasdair did in questioning the status quo, we can pay appropriate tribute and deference to his memory, and I'm sure in that way that his impact and memory will live on.
I had the privilege of working with Alasdair over a period of approximately 12 years. What I so admired about him, he was a visionary, but at the same time, he was a very down-to-earth pragmatist. And I have one short anecdote to share with you about his pragmatic ways. Years ago, I was the lead author on a manuscript we wished to publish. There were many co-authors, and we had already gone through many rounds of revisions. And still, some authors said, shouldn't we do this, shouldn't we address that, etc. And Alasdair sensed my exasperation. So he very kindly wrote an email to everyone stating authoritatively, there comes a time in the life of a manuscript where you stop improving. And that was it. No one protested, we submitted, all went well. So that to me was a classic Alasdair.
I first interacted with Sir Alasdair around the early 2000s, I think, when he was very good at drawing out people's opinion. Actually, in fact, he had a habit of calling on people who weren't really speaking up at the meeting and asking them, what was their opinion on a particular topic at hand. In fact, he called me out so many times I began to wonder whether it was even random. Outside of these meetings, he was a great individual to sit next to at the dinner table. Always had some witty observation or humorous story to enliven the discussion, and was particularly engaged in talking to younger, newer regulators and encouraging them. I will miss him tremendously in the core board discussions. He was, of course, the inaugural chairman of the core advisory board and was great at facilitating discussions from the various members who came from different fields of medicine and regulation.
Sir Alasdair was a very dear friend and special mentor to me for over 30 years. He taught me how medicine's regulations should be conducted to be both effective and efficient. Most importantly, he showed me how to fight one's corner when it comes to science and regulation with the panache that only a Scottish peer could ever muster. My most endearing memory of Alasdair is eating countless meals with him at his London club, the Athenaeum, where numerous luminaries of British science and culture have been members over the centuries. Truly, he ranks right there with them.
I highly respect his great contribution to the international pharmaceutical and regulatory affairs as a key figure for a long time. Since I joined Core Advisory Board member, every time I saw him at a meeting in Singapore, I learned a lot of him. He was so knowledgeable, and his comments were always helpful. He is in mind and lead me even now. I thank you from my heart.
Working with Sir Alasdair has been both a privilege and pleasure. Before I first met Alasdair in 2014, John had shared Alasdair's larger-than-life personality with me. And upon meeting him, he certainly did live up to that. Alasdair became a great mentor for me, always sharing his expertise, wisdom, and passion for regulatory science. And as we discussed making core a reality, he instilled the notion of excellence in us and reminded us often to never lose sight of that. In our many conversations with him, Alasdair was quick to recognize the needs for regulatory training and thought leadership needed in the region. And he believed that CORE had the ability to fill this need. And so as we got to work laying the foundations of our vision, mission, strategy, and yes, work plans, it was easy to see how invested he was in making the center a reality and success, but always pushing us towards excellence.
It was my great privilege to have known Alasdair from when I was at Singapore's Health Sciences Authority in the early 2000s. Alasdair was a strong supporter of Singapore and what we were trying to do in building up our regulatory system, and he visited us often over the years. His imposing height, his extraordinary intellect, his stern demeanor masking a mischievous, dry sense of humor, and his warmth and graciousness made him a wonderful mentor, friend, and role model. His passion for robust science, regulatory rigor, and policy innovation inspired many of us in the international community. We always needed to be prepared to answer a pointed question from him on a challenging issue whenever he chaired meetings. Given Alasdair's immense experience and wisdom, in 2013, I sought his counsel on establishing the Duke-NUS Center of Regulatory Excellence, or CORE, for the Asia-Pacific and Southeast Asia. He not only enthusiastically supported this, but readily agreed to serve as the inaugural chairman of the advisory board. All of us in CORE are truly indebted to Alasdair's sound and visionary guidance for what we've grown into and been able to achieve. Given Alasdair's deep commitment to advancing biomedical, scientific, and regulatory thinking and innovation, CORE and our advisory board decided that it was only fitting to establish an annual lecture in his name. The Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture Series will address and foster dialogue on global biomedical and regulatory issues, challenges, and advances. This will be in keeping with Alasdair's commitment to improving international health products regulation and health policy innovation for the benefit of patients, systems, and societies.
Hello, I'm Ross Breckenridge, Alasdair's son. On behalf of the Breckenridge family, I'd like to say how grateful and honoured we are that this prestigious set of lectures is being named after him, and how honoured he would have been. We'd like to thank Professor Lim and also to Professor Farrar for giving up his time to deliver the inaugural lecture. The last 12 months have shown us how important it is to put scientific understanding and the scientific method at the heart of drug regulation to protect societal health. So the mission of the centre couldn't be more timely and is obviously going to grow. Please know that you have very strong permanent support from the remaining Breckenridges in the UK, and we very much look forward to meeting you all in person at some point in the future. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, to further our tribute to the late Professor Sir Alasdair Breckenridge, may I now invite Professor John Lim, the founding Executive Director of CORE, to deliver his welcome address. Professor Lim is also Chairman of the Consortium for Clinical Research and Innovation Singapore and a Senior Advisor at Singapore's Ministry of Health. He is also the Policy Core Lead at the SingHealth Duke-NUS Global Health Institute. Professor Lim, please.
Guest of Honour, Professor Kenneth Mak, Director of Medical Services, Ministry of Health, Singapore. Dr. Chong Wei Yang, Deputy Secretary for Special Projects, Ministry of Health, Singapore. Professor Thomas Kaufman, Dean of the Duke-NUS Medical School. Professor Sir Jeremy Farrar, Director of the Wellcome Trust and inaugural lecturer of the Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture Series. Dr. Margaret Hamburg, Chair of the Core Advisory Board. All advisory board members, and our many friends and colleagues who are joining us in person and online in Singapore and from around the world, and of course the graduating students from the 2020-21 Duke-NUS Graduate Certificate in Health Products Regulation cohort. May I extend a very warm welcome to the nearly 500 who've signed up to participate from different time zones to attend this inaugural lecture of the Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture Series and graduation ceremony. And I would like to especially acknowledge Alasdair's wife, Jean, and their sons, Ross and Bruce Breckenridge, and other family members attending virtually from the UK. The moving video you have just watched is testimony to Professor Sir Alasdair Breckenridge's enormous impact on the international community of regulators and regulatory science professionals. Alasdair already had an illustrious academic public service and international career dating back to the 1970s, when I first met him in the early 2000s at meetings of the Center for Innovation and Regulatory Science, or CIRS, after he'd been appointed the inaugural chair of the expanded UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, or MHRA, in 2003. Alasdair studied medicine at the University of St Andrews in Scotland, followed by a notable academic career as Professor of Clinical Pharmacology at the University of Liverpool. Globally, he was involved with the World Health Organization, the International Union of Pharmacology, and numerous other associations. He was awarded the Paul Martini Prize in Clinical Pharmacology and the Paulson Medal of the Norwegian Pharmacological Society. Alasdair was well recognized for his tireless dedication to healthcare, patients, and populations. Among these were his significant engagements with the administration of the UK National Health Service as chair of the MHRA and chair of the Emerging Science and Bioethics Advisory Committee. He wrote and published extensively. In the 1995 birthday honours, Alasdair was appointed Commander of the Order of the British Empire and was subsequently knighted in the Queen's 2004 New Year honours for his service to UK academic medicine. Alasdair's energy and constant interest in life were evident whenever and wherever I met him, sometimes in quite exotic locations at summit meetings of the heads of regulatory agencies that eventually gave rise to what is now the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities. When he visited Singapore in 2008, at the time the Health Sciences Authority, or HSA, hosted the third meeting in the summit series, we signed a memorandum of understanding between our respective organizations, the MHRA and HSA. From that time on, he paid frequent visits to Singapore, Southeast and East Asia, and he greatly encouraged us in our pursuit of strengthening regulatory excellence in the region. As mentioned in the video, when the concept of establishing the Duke-NUS Center of Regulatory Excellence, or CORE, was shared with him in 2013, Alasdair immediately saw the critical need for regulatory training and thought leadership in regulatory policy matters that CORE could help to provide in Southeast Asia and the Asia-Pacific. As inaugural chair of CORE's advisory board, Alasdair envisioned the center as an influential contributor to regulatory thought leadership and capacity building in the region, and increasingly at a global level. Today's graduation ceremony for the 2020-21 cohort from CORE's Graduate Certificate in Health Products Regulation Program and the increased uptake for the modules with wider regional participation when they were moved online in 2020 during the pandemic reflect the ongoing realization of Alasdair's vision. During his tenure as chair, Alasdair was instrumental in guiding the development and refining of CORE's strategic objectives to serve governments, industry, academia, NGOs, and of course, patients. The center owes Alasdair a tremendous debt of gratitude for his unparalleled leadership and clear-sighted guidance. Our advisory board, led by Dr. Margaret Hamburg, the lecture series steering committee, and CORE's management were of one mind in establishing the Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture to honor Alasdair's memory. The lecture series will have a forward-looking perspective on themes of enhancing biomedical innovation, strengthening health systems and regulation, and promoting equitable access to good, safe, and effective health products. We believe this will appropriately reflect Alasdair's commitment to advancing global health products regulation and health policy innovation for the benefit of patients, systems, and societies. It is certainly a priority that I believe Alasdair would have championed in the context of COVID-19. We are therefore delighted that the inaugural lecture will be delivered today by Professor Sir Farrar, Director of the Wellcome Trust. Alasdair and I met Jeremy in Singapore in 2017 when he was attending an International Advisory Council meeting for Singapore's biomedical initiatives, and I'm sure Alasdair would have strongly approved of our choice of lecturer. The Wellcome Trust is a politically and financially independent global charitable foundation that exists to fund science to solve the urgent health challenges facing everyone. Jeremy is a clinician scientist who, before becoming director of the Wellcome Trust in 2013, was for 18 years director of the Oxford University Clinical Research Unit in Vietnam, where his research interests were infectious diseases and global health with a focus on emerging infections. He has published almost 600 articles. He was named 12th in the Fortune list of 50 world's greatest leaders in 2015 and was awarded the Memorial Medal and Ho Chi Minh City Medal from the government of Vietnam. In 2018, he was awarded the President Jimmy and Rosalind Carter Humanitarian of the Year Award. He's a Fellow of the Academy of Medical Sciences UK, the National Academies USA, the European Molecular Biology Organization, and a Fellow of the Royal Society. Jeremy was knighted in the Queen's 2018 New Year Honours for services to global health. Today, Jeremy will speak on the topic of science, innovation, and society, highlighting the importance and interconnectedness of these three themes in the context of COVID-19. This is very apt with a lecture series being launched during the pandemic as a hybrid event with a small in-person gathering in Singapore and a significant online international audience. It is now my great pleasure to invite Sir Jeremy Farrar to deliver the 2021 inaugural Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture.
Thank you very much indeed. There's always this nervous moment on virtual meetings just to make sure that everybody can see and hear me. But thank you for that very, very generous welcome, but also a great thank you to everybody that put this lecture series together, and it's an enormous honour to be able to start the lecture series with the inaugural lecture. And like many before, I'd just like to pay tribute to Alasdair. It wasn't the first time I met him, actually. In 2017, I'd worked with him previously, where he had been an incredible force, if that's the right word, during the early days of HIV, which was something I was working with at the time in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and pay tribute to his role in setting up the Medicines Agency, the MHRA, in the UK. And I think when the first person to set up an agency like that, or at least to expand it and give it its modern purpose, actually gives the whole sense of its mission and its values. And the MHRA today, somewhat 17 or 18 years later, after he became the initial chair, still lives that today, in my view, and I'll touch upon that later. But Alasdair's fierce independence, his importance of putting science at the heart of decision-making, and his ability and willingness to fight for the corner, for doing the right thing, rather than sometimes doing the politically expedient thing, was an amazing contribution to setting up the values of the MHRA, and those values persist today and have been so important over the last 12 months as we've lived through COVID. But also like to pay tribute to Duke-NUS. Thank you very much for the invitation to this lecture series, but also to a very, very good friend and colleague, Peggy, who is coming after this, Hamburg. And we've worked very, very closely together, actually, over many years, and particularly over the last 12 months or so. And it's been a real pleasure to do so, Peggy, and look forward to listening to your talk later as well. And finally, to the family, Alasdair's family, it was a huge loss to you all, we know, but I hope there is some comfort in appreciating the incredible contribution Alasdair made to public life, to science, and critically to patients as well. So I hope this lecture series does you proud for what was a remarkable individual and an amazing contribution. And congratulations to the graduation class from the core graduation series, and very best wishes to your futures. You have a critical role to play in Singapore, in the region, and globally in plotting the future of science, of innovation and regulation, and the role that they play in society. So my warmest best wishes to your futures. You could not have trained in a better institution. So I look back to the setting up of the Centre for Research Excellence at Duke-NUS, and I was taken by a couple of comments made at the time by Senior Minister Tarman, who talked about the centre as being a place to bring people together. And I think that is absolutely critical. But also the comments from Mr. Gan Kim Yong, who's the Minister of Health at the time, who challenged the centre to be innovative, to test approaches, to future-proof and make sure it was fit for the future challenges, to give patients timely access to good, and that is critical, to good and safe, effective medicines and devices. And I think ringing through those statements of now, 7 years ago, I think does lie at the heart of what the Centre for Research Excellence is trying to do, and I know is achieving. It is about innovation. It is about facilitating great science and making sure that science is available to people. It is about being ahead of the dogma, of being ahead of the thinking, of being ahead of where science is today and looking to where science is tomorrow, and doing all of that in the context and the service of the society in which it operates in. And I think in that summary is actually very true to what Alasdair did at the MHRA. I think it's what he spent his life doing, and I think he would be very proud to see the progress of the Centre for Research Excellence at Duke-NUS. So it would be nice to talk about science, innovation, society in the absence of COVID, but the shadow of COVID continues to hang over us. And I think it would be remiss to not frame this talk within the context of the COVID year that we have been living through and continue to live through. And I think it might be worth just pausing and give a personal view of where I believe the pandemic is. In Singapore, you have a particular phase of the epidemic at the moment, and pay tribute to everybody involved in public health, clinical medicine, policy making, and investment in science over many years. As a result of all of those and the experience in Singapore gained through many epidemics over the last 20 years, starting with Nipah in 1999, all the way through SARS-1 and many, many others, gave you a resilience and the determination to invest in critical scientific endeavor and the innovative environment, and to put that in the context of society that has allowed Singapore to deal with the horror of the last year in many ways better than many other parts of the world. And in fact, that is true of much of Southeast Asia. And that is a tribute to all of those issues that I talked about: long-term investment, a policy-making environment that is put science at the heart of it, and a consistent and cohesive messaging and engagement of society. But that situation of the pandemic is not true everywhere, I'm afraid to say. Actually, where I sit now in the UK having had an extraordinarily difficult 2020, when I'm afraid not every decision made was the right decision, and Britain has suffered dreadfully. But as we talk today in April 2021, I am more optimistic, actually, that the UK is now through the worst of this phase of the pandemic. And with the remarkable rollout of vaccination, the coming of really superb public health and genomic sequencing of viruses, the recovery trial, clinical work to work out the best way of treating patients, preventing them getting sick, and tragically also preventing them tragically dying, has been a high spot of the last 12 months. And the UK now is in a good position. But again, like Singapore and Southeast Asia, that is not universally true. And over the last 8 weeks, the pandemic has continued to expand. The number of patients infected every day is increasing. The number of deaths continues to climb. And the epidemics at the moment in continental Europe, in Central and South America, in South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and still in many parts of the continent of Africa, continue to reverberate. And the pandemic will continue to reverberate until we allow the science that has been absolutely extraordinary in the last 12 months, until we allow that science, whether it is non-pharmacological interventions, it's therapeutics, it's diagnostics, it's genome sequencing, it's public health, and yes, it's vaccines alongside personal protective equipment and oxygen. That is the science that has been developed over the last 12 months. And if we can make that science now accessible to the world in an equitable and distributed way, then I do believe that science is the exit strategy from the pandemic. Science has made extraordinary progress, but now the big challenge is to make sure that science reaches the maximum number of people globally in order to bring the pandemic to a close. And indeed, that is not just a scientific imperative. It is not just a public health imperative. In truth, it is enlightened self-interest to everybody, because the world economy on which economic growth and opportunities lie cannot get back to what it was before until we bring the pandemic to a close everywhere. If we end up in a world of a pandemic reverberating in certain parts of the world and not in others, then eventually new variants will appear and they will escape from vaccines and therapeutics in the future. And then the pandemic starts again. So it is morally and ethically, in my view, the right thing to do. I'm sure Alasdair would have agreed with that. It is also actually an economic and financial imperative that we bring the pandemic to a close everywhere. And we are still some way off that. But I'd also like to pause now. I mentioned Nipah earlier. Nipah was really the start of my own involvement in emerging infectious diseases. Many in Southeast Asia and indeed in Singapore will still remember the Nipah outbreak that originated actually in Malaysia amongst pigs and pig farmers and did spread to Singapore and has now become endemic in Bangladesh. And that was really the start, in my view, of the modern era of these regional or global epidemics and pandemics. And if we think of the drivers of each of those epidemics, and we could list many, Nipah, SARS-1, which also, as people painfully will be aware, in Singapore and Southeast Asia had a dramatic impact, but also the Middle East respiratory syndrome, of Zika in Central and South America, of chikungunya, of bird flu, H5N1, which I was very involved in Vietnam. The pandemic of 2009 and H1N1 influenza remains a huge threat to us all. To Ebola, of course, in West Africa and still smoldering even in Guinea and in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And of course, with climate change, dengue spreading to new areas. And over the last 15 months, SARS-CoV-2. In 20 years, that is a series of major disruptive epidemics and pandemics. And the truth is, because the drivers behind those epidemics are all features that will define the 21st century, it is true that these epidemics and pandemics will become more frequent and they will become more complex, because the drivers of ecological change, environmental change, the human-animal interface changing as animals seek new habitats or humans invade natural animal habitats, urbanization, which allows an animal virus to come across the species barrier into humans and then get a foothold in a major city that is highly connected within the country it is in and with the region and then the world through trade and travel. These are all features that will be prevalent throughout the 21st century. And if you think back to December and January, I first heard of SARS-CoV-2 in the 31st of December 2019, and you think of that group of things I've just mentioned, I think it is very clear, in my view, that the virus originated in a mammal population not yet defined. Bats played a role. It came across into humans. Those humans then were either from or traveled to a big city in China, which was highly connected within China and with the rest of the region and the world at a time of year which was around Chinese New Year, which makes it more complicated, in the winter months, which allowed the infection to gain a hold and then transmit human to human. And it came into that big city at a time when we had no diagnostic test, we had no treatments, we had no vaccines, and it happened at a time of difficult and tense geopolitics. And I think all of those things together is actually what led to the devastating impact of the last 12 months. I frame this in 4 consequences, which I think are also true for the drivers underpinning these epidemic diseases, but also challenges of our 21st century living. And that is when something like COVID happens, the first circle, if you like, of the ripple effect, as if you were throwing a stone into a pond. The first circle of disruption is the direct health consequence. The pressure on health systems as large numbers of people need to be cared for in clinics and hospitals around the world, putting pressure on the systems which have put efficiency above resilience and have very little surge capacity. So there is the direct health consequence, and tragically already in just 6 to 12 months, many millions of people have tragically lost their lives. So the direct consequences are profound. The second circle is the indirect health consequences. In almost every country which has been devastated by COVID-19, other care, whether maternal child care, mental health, cancer care, diabetic care, routine surgery, emergency surgery, malaria control, tuberculosis control, and everything else has suffered because of the demand driven by the need for health services to focus on COVID, as well as incredibly brave healthcare workers who have both been ill themselves and lost their lives. The third circle, which in some ways is even bigger and will have a longer term consequence, is the broad economic impact of something as disruptive as COVID-19. Economics, the economies of the world has suffered somewhere between 12 and $16 trillion, wiped off global economies. Education has suffered. Students in high school and universities have not been able to be having face-to-face teaching, and that will have a consequence for the long term. Trade and travel has been disrupted. Remittances have not been flowing back to countries. Debt has increased everywhere. And inevitably, in times of tension, trust in governments and trust in the public services has been questioned. And the COVID-19, again, in every country who has suffered badly, has lifted a lid on existing inequalities that existed in all of our societies prior to COVID-19, but somehow we managed to cover up or try and forget about. And inequalities has driven much of the disruption that has happened. So the third circle is that economic, societal trust in governments impact. And I think that will take longer to regain, even when science points the way out of the pandemic. And then the fourth circle, which I think we have started to see happening, but is geopolitics. It is no coincidence, I think, that COVID-19 was able to have such a devastating effect, because it did happen at a time of tense East-West and indeed North-South relations. And the political impact of this pandemic, with countries blaming one another, even today, of countries thinking at a very nationalistic level, when in reality all of these issues are trans-border, means that we have to look at this in the future and think, if we are to address the great challenges of the 21st century, all of which by their nature are going to be transnational, regional or global, then we are going to have to find a mechanism for bringing countries together and appreciating that just taking an individual and insular approach is not going to allow countries to really address the challenges affecting all of our societies in the decades to come. So I think as we go through, and I hope at some point come out of the pandemic of 2020 and 2021, we must reflect, I think, on these four circles and how can we prevent the disruption that is going to happen through the challenges of the 21st century, whether it is epidemics or climate change or environmental change, land use change, drug-resistant infections, demographic shifts, multimorbidity, energy access, clean water access. These are all by their nature challenging. They're all transnational. They're all global in their solutions, and they all require science. They require that science to be innovated and, yes, commercialized. And they also require that science and that innovation to be put at the service of the societies in which they thrive. And if we think of it, I think, as these three groups: science, then how do we make sure that science is innovative? How do we make sure that that science, where appropriate, is commercialized? How do we make sure that science is regulated? How do we make sure that the regulations facilitate the science rather than hinder it? And how do we also make sure that that science is then made accessible in an equitable way to everybody that needs it? And I think these are the sorts of questions, as we live through one of these moments in history, when the world really does change, that we have to reflect on in the weeks, months, and years to come. Challenged by COVID-19, but appreciating that COVID-19 will not be the last epidemic or pandemic. It will not be the last globally disruptive event. And we must relook at the way we were structured, the way we used science within policymaking, and make sure that we have a system which values resilience as well as efficiency, and has a system that has sufficient surge capacity to deal with the disruptive elements that we know are inevitable, given the challenges we are likely to face. And I think we have to question whether we're set up to do that. And I think all of us, whether at Duke-NUS, in the United States, wherever in the world you are, and indeed as a funder of science and research and education, innovation and society at the Wellcome Trust, we all should reflect on whether our structures and systems coming through education, how research is done, how research funding is done. Are we really funding the right things? Are we taking enough risk? Are we backing people and teams in good environments that can really produce the innovation that will change the way we live for the better? And do we have systems in place to make sure that science is made accessible to everybody that needs it? Do we have the right incentives, the right rewards? Do we have career structures which make science, innovation, an attractive career option for the next generation of people that will provide the solutions to today and tomorrow's challenges? And if we are going to take risk, which we must do, it's actually a thing, risk, I think, very important for philanthropies like Wellcome to take a lead on, because we can take more risk, I think, sometimes than the public sector. But if we do take risk in the commercial sector, in industry, or indeed in government, who is ultimately going to pay for that risk? At the moment, for many of the things we're talking about here, epidemic diseases, drugs, vaccines, diagnostic devices, and others, it's often industry which is carrying all of that risk in the hope that it will get a payback eventually when it's able to sell that in whatever marketplace it has. I think we're going to have to rethink that, because I think government is going to have to de-risk some of that and provide better incentives for the innovation of great science to make sure that that innovation actually happens when we're needing these for global public goods. If we do need vaccines for diseases which are epidemic in their nature, they may or may not happen, but if they do happen, they're incredibly disruptive. It's not really acceptable that we would anticipate that industry would only carry that risk. I think governments are going to have to find a different, more innovative way of working out that interface between the public and private sector. And that risk will have to be shared earlier than it is at the moment, where essentially risk is taken by industry and by financial houses, and then there is a payback at a future date. Well, that may not work when you have things like antibiotics for treating drug-resistant infections, or indeed making vaccines and therapeutics for epidemic diseases, which may not happen. So over the last 12 months, science, I think, has been absolutely extraordinary in what it has been able to deliver. It is worth reminding ourselves that the genome of this virus was released on the 10th or 11th of January. Within 42 days, a company, Moderna, had made a vaccine which was then able to start clinical trials. And many other companies and academic groups then followed very soon afterwards, so that within the calendar year of the epidemic becoming known to the globe, it was possible to be using vaccines in a public health way. That is an extraordinary thing to say. Science that has long been invested in by enlightened countries was able to deliver the vaccines and indeed some of the treatments that were needed. I think there's many lessons to learn from that. Firstly, I think it's fascinating that the RNA and the DNA vaccines came forward. They didn't necessarily, though, come forward from people working in infectious diseases. They came forward from people working in cancer, in BioNTech's case, and indeed in cancer and other indications with Moderna. And yet that platform technology is proving to be exceptional. The adenoviruses, now produced by the AstraZeneca Oxford Group and Johnson & Johnson, have also been extraordinary. But they didn't just happen in 2020. They happened because of years of investment in discovery science and ideas that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't over many decades prior to that. And it was that bedrock of long-term investment in science which was possible to then be pivoted when it came to the threat of an epidemic. And I pay great tribute to all of those people and teams involved in the academic, the funding sector, and in industry who were able to produce those vaccines in such a record time. I also think now, as we come to think of how that science gets innovated, that the combination then that industry stepped up and paid tribute to Pfizer and Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, about how they took those vaccines and produced them at scale. But one of the glaring issues that has come up, and this will cause and is causing today great tension, is how do we ensure that the manufacturing of that is also innovative, that it is also better distributed at a global scale so that the vaccines no longer remain the preserve of a small number of countries? How can we ensure in the future that vaccine manufacturing keeps up and innovates? And I think there's great room for vaccine manufacturing innovation, that innovation and manufacturing capacity is then much better distributed at a global level to allow much greater equitable access. I do not believe that it's intellectual property which is holding that innovation up. It is the fact that there is just not enough manufacturing capacity. And as a personal idea here, which I think might be relevant to Singapore, I would be very interested in exploring in the future the role of what I call small population countries who would be able to manufacture vaccines for the world. They could provide for their domestic needs very, very quickly in populations, say, of less than 10 million people, with a strong regulatory environment and protection of intellectual property, but would very quickly be able to not just produce for their own population, which is absolutely the preserve of every government, but very, very quickly could be manufacturing for the world. And I think that might help us get through some of the problems that we have at the moment, that the vaccine manufacturing is focused in a small number of countries, and many of those countries are very large population, and inevitably, I'm afraid, governments will have to look after domestic supply and their own citizens at a time when there is also a massive global demand. So I would like to propose the idea that small population countries with extremely good technological know-how, a very good legal structure, protection of intellectual property, and ability to manufacture could play a really critical role in the future as a global supply chain for essential public goods, which otherwise I think we will always struggle with this tension between domestic supply and global access. On the innovation side, I think that Peggy would be one of, if not the world leading expert on this. We are also going to enter a phase of disruption scientifically and in innovation. The platform technologies, I think, whether RNA or DNA or adeno, I think are going to become much more prevalent in the years to come, not just in infectious diseases, but also in cancer, in autoimmune diseases, maybe as well in treatment of mental health and dementia and other conditions. That's an incredibly exciting time in science, but it will need a more, I think, innovative regulatory environment. And we've learned over the last 12 months that you don't need to cut corners in the science or in the regulatory environment if we have a more iterative process where regulation is there to protect societies from unsafe things being registered, but it's also there to protect and encourage and facilitate science driving into innovation. And I think if we can get that right with the lessons we've learned in the last 12 months about how innovation has really happened in a remarkably short period of time, I think we will be able to take innovative scientific ideas from blue sky thinking through the commercial enterprises and to the benefit of patients in a much faster way. And I think that's an incredibly exciting development. That could be in platform technologies. It could be in manufacturing processes. And I think what the regulatory agencies around the world have done, to their great credit over the last 12 months, is really worked in a different way with the innovators, with the scientists, and with the commercial bodies to make sure there is a pathway to regulation which is essentially trusted by societies. And that is so, so important. You take years to gain that sort of trust, and you can lose it in an instant. And the way that the regulatory agencies of the last 12 months have stepped up and seen their role to facilitate science, to facilitate innovation, to have an iterative partnership with the innovators, and also keep at their absolute center of what they do, the societies in which they serve, and the critical need for those regulatory agencies to remain independent of the political process. If I look back over the last 12 months and see some of the negative things that have happened, I'm afraid it has happened where we've turned these issues into political aspects, where I'm afraid sometimes in some countries, politics has overridden that independence. And again, I go back to the role that Peggy played at the FDA, and I know Alasdair played at the MHRA. It is absolutely critical that these regulatory bodies are independent of political pressure, that they must reach their decisions based on the very best science, and they need to be able to speak truth to power and make sure that they are looking after the societies they operate in and do not get dragged into short-term political expediency decisions when their role is to preserve the truth to power and their independence. And I pay tribute to regulatory agencies around the world that have managed to do that, and I would question the politicalization of those regulatory agencies, something that I think the Centre for Research Excellence really could focus on in the future. How does an agency like that, which is an arm of government in some ways, maintain its political independence at a time when political pressures may be very, very severe? So I'm going to draw to a close now. I think that the lessons for me of the last 12 months is what you have in place before a crisis hits largely determines your ability to cope with a crisis. If you try and establish relationships, structures, systems, decision-making processes in the context of a crisis, you will always be too slow and you'll always fail. And you'll make a lot of mistakes along the way, which will cost people's lives. So I think the investment before a crisis in so-called peacetime has to be sustained. It has to put resilience above efficiency. It has to be politically independent so that it is not just at the whim of one government and then changed with another government when it gets elected or otherwise. That science needs to be invested over the long term. It needs to be blue sky. It needs to be able to take risks in the basic science. But we also have to appreciate that science must be innovated. It has to exist in an ecosystem which encourages innovation and entrepreneurs. It encourages industry's engagement, and it has a regulatory environment which is independent, which puts science first. It sees its role to protect society, but also to ensure that innovation reaches people and people benefit from the innovation that can come out of great science. And finally, and most importantly, that science, that innovation, that regulatory environment is there for society. And science and innovation only thrives throughout human history when it has the support of society, not as an add-on at the end, but as a trusted part of the culture of a society that societies and communities support because of the benefits it brings, that science and scientists, regulators and innovators are ultimately responsible to society. And they need to ensure that they involve societies and communities through the process, not just as an add-on at the end. Public engagement needs to shift to public involvement. It needs to make sure that we appreciate who is the final beneficiary and therefore who is the ultimate holder of what science and innovation can do. And I'm very clear, that is the public, it is communities, it is individuals, and it is ultimately society. And that is, I think, the thread of what I've mostly learned in the last 12 months. Trust is crucial. We have to have science leading to innovation. We have to have an innovative environment that is supported by strong, independent regulators. And we must keep patient individuals, communities, and society at the heart of everything we do. I think that's what Alasdair would have wanted. I think it's what he spent his life fighting for. I know it's what Peggy has spent her life fighting for. And I hope that is at the core of what the Centre for Research Excellence at Duke-NUS is putting as its values and its mission. It's been a pleasure and honour to join. I'm sorry it's virtual. I was born in Singapore, as many of you know, and I have a great affection for the country and for the region. And I very much look forward to coming back later this year, I hope, for some work to be done with colleagues in Singapore. So thank you for listening. I hope to see you in 2021, and I hope that's been of some interest.
Thank you, Sir Jeremy Farrar, for your insights. It is my great pleasure now to invite Dr. Margaret Hamburg, joining us virtually to say a few words. Dr. Hamburg is well known as the 21st Commissioner of the US FDA, and she is the chair of CORE's Advisory Board. Dr. Hamburg has also been the Foreign Secretary for the US National Academy of Medicine and chair for the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Dr. Hamburg chairs the Joint Coordinating Group for the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, CEPI, and she is a board member of Gavi. Dr. Hamburg, please.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be part of this important and inspiring event, and delighted to add a few brief remarks about Sir Alasdair Breckenridge and the new fund that has been created in his honor. And it's truly an honor to follow Sir Jeremy's eloquent, insightful, far-reaching, and compelling remarks. He is an extraordinary leader and thinker, as his remarks this evening so brilliantly have demonstrated. Also, I would note he has laid out quite an agenda for us to work on together and through our individual organizations and institutions to tackle some of the most important problems before us, really ensuring that science is developed and applied in critical ways to serve society. And I also did appreciate his remarks about the central importance of regulatory science and regulatory authorities as we address these critical problems before us and as we continue to combat COVID-19. You know, frankly, few have had the impact during COVID that Jeremy has had, but his reach and influence extend so much further, shaping how we really think about and undertake investments in biomedical research and how best to align those opportunities to advance science and innovation with opportunities to advance the health of people and the planet. And he really knows how to bring people together across disciplines, across sectors, and across borders to collaborate and solve those really big, urgent problems. So, you know, what a fantastic opportunity to have him with us at this event and to help us launch the Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture. And I think it's only appropriate, and you know, we are absolutely honored that Sir Jeremy agreed to present our inaugural Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture, and he has set an extraordinarily high standard, I must say. Like Sir Jeremy, Alasdair Breckenridge was committed to science, innovation, and society. He was passionate about clinical pharmacology, but not just as an academic area of study, but rather how to deepen knowledge and insights and how to apply that science to offer new, better, more innovative therapies for people, and how to better understand how to use available treatments as well. His dedication towards healthcare, patients, and populations was profound, and he was determined that the best possible science would be used to inform decisions and improve health. We've already heard about Sir Alasdair's extraordinary career and accomplishments. Not surprisingly, he brought that knowledge and experience along with his passion and his tireless energy to CORE, the Center of Regulatory Excellence. As the founding advisory board chair, he has made a lasting difference. From the outset, he offered a vision that has defined the unique position of CORE as an influential contributor to regulatory thought leadership and capacity building throughout the Asia-Pacific region, but increasingly at a global level. During his tenure, Sir Alasdair played a key role in the formation and implementation of the strategic objectives of CORE, Asia's first center for regulatory excellence, and I'd have to add, the first center of its kind really anywhere in the world. His leadership and guidance enabled the center to successfully develop and grow, serving government, industry, and academia. Acting as a training center, a work collaborative, and a think tank, CORE is making a real and lasting difference. CORE has a terrific team and a wonderful leader in Professor John Lim, CORE's brilliant and intrepid executive director. I often marvel at how he's been able to create this thriving hub of activity as a center of regulatory excellence, building competencies, enhancing collaboration, and promoting innovative thinking and new leadership in regulatory science and policy. But he would be the first to say that he did not do it alone, and that so much of the enterprising and innovative work of the center reflects the vision, irrepressible enthusiasm, and advocacy of one Alasdair Breckenridge. So it's not surprising that CORE now seeks to honor the memory of this truly remarkable man and continue his mission by launching the Alasdair Breckenridge Fund. The fund will enable CORE to expand learning opportunities, strengthen and extend regulatory capacity building, and further encourage and support collaboration. Significantly, the fund will enable study awards to health professionals from national regulatory authorities, ministries of health, and related organizations from the ASEAN and Asia-Pacific region to enroll in courses run by CORE, offsetting the course fees, travel expenses, and accommodation costs of participants. I cannot underscore strongly enough how this kind of professional development and regulatory capacity building matters. And frankly, the work of CORE has never been more relevant, more vital to the health, safety, productivity, and well-being of people in Singapore, the region, and beyond. Whether addressing the pressing threat of a global pandemic or the continuing burden of infectious and chronic diseases, if we are truly going to deliver on the power of science and innovation for the betterment of all, enabling a world where everyone has access to good, safe, and effective health products, we must recognize this unique and essential role of regulatory science and smart, responsible regulatory policy and oversight. And the mission goes further because it's not sufficient to simply focus on advancing regulatory science and practice, but that work must become an integral part of broader efforts to strengthen health systems overall and to address the challenges of global health. And there are so many real and urgent challenges ahead in the Asia-Pacific region as in others. Such concerns as fragmented regulatory requirements across nations, limited awareness of regulatory issues, insufficient education and training opportunities, and a lack of capacity and suitable mechanisms for regulatory science and policy development and its application. Needless to say, CORE is well positioned to contribute to developing those areas as a neutral but highly respected and expert academic platform for capacity building, enhanced collaboration, and thought leadership in innovative regulatory science and policy. It is making a difference, and it is positioned to do so much more in the days ahead. But it does need support. The Alasdair Breckenridge Fund will certainly help to realize these critical goals and harness the power of science by and for people. It's a very special, meaningful undertaking. For those of you who care and who can, I hope that you'll help honor the legacy and hopes of a great man, Sir Alasdair Breckenridge, and support his vision and the great work of this vital institution, CORE, either by giving to the Alasdair Breckenridge Fund specifically, or offer more broad-based support to the CORE campaign by donating to the Regulatory Excellence Fund. Either way, you'll be helping to promote excellence in regulatory sciences and practices to safeguard the health and well-being of patients and populations. Your support can advance cross-border knowledge exchange, regulatory capacity building, and ongoing training as participants from diverse backgrounds collaborate and learn. In addition, you'll help to build the future, enabling up-and-coming health and regulatory professionals to access educational networks and build new understandings and new networks of expertise. And so on that note, I think it's time for us to move on in our program and to our event's capstone, the graduation ceremony, for a group of outstanding core trainees. These new graduates will play a critical leadership role in relation to regulatory activities in their own countries, but also around the world. So I will turn now, offering good wishes and congratulations to this extraordinary and impressive graduating class, but I will turn back to John Lim, our outstanding Executive Director of CORE, along with Professor Thomas Kaufman, Dean of the Duke-NUS Medical School, and Associate Professor Silke Vogel, Deputy Director of CORE, all valued colleagues in our CORE activities. So let me say again, what a wonderful presentation Sir Jeremy Farrar was able to offer, really supporting and expanding on the ideals that Sir Alasdair Breckenridge so valued and exemplified in his life and work. And let me now let the graduation ceremony commence.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamburg. If you would like to find out more about the CORE campaign, please scan the QR code that's shown on the screen or click on the Zoom link that's provided in the Zoom chat function for more information on how to donate. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to the graduation ceremony for the Graduate Certificate for Health Product Regulation. May I please invite on stage the graduation party, which includes Dean Kaufman, Professor Silke Vogel, and Assistant Professor James Leong.
Well, congratulations to our graduates who have fulfilled the requirements and attained the graduate certificate in health products regulation. As I read out your name, please step forward to the stage to receive a certificate. Ms. Aisha Binti Semanggun. Dr. Ati Balasundaram. Ms. Chung Hui Lin, Wendy. Ms. Chua Biha, Diana. Ms. Ho Hui Ting. Mr. Howard Chai. Mr. Hui Wei Guang. Ms. Ian Kidd. Ms. Joyce Yap. Dr. Ko Poling, Ms. Lai Chiwen Samantha, Ms. Lee Chai Ha Sherry, Ms. Lee Yan Wei, Ms. Lee Yong An, Dr. Lim Tong Sing, Dr. Permin Akhtar binti Muhammad Yusuf, Ms. Po Zifing, Ms. Siti Asha binti Muhammad Rilvan, Ms. Siti Noor Wahida Awari, Ms. Tae Wei Ling Ginny, Ms. Teng Hui Mien, Ms. Wang Yue Yi, We have now completed the segment for graduates who have joined us in this auditorium. May I now invite Dean Kaufman back to your seat. Thank you, Dean. The Corps is proud to have 3 graduates who are recipients of Corps Study Award. These awards are given to qualified regulators in ASEAN to support regulatory capacity building. Our overseas graduates are also with us virtually in the Zoom platform, and they are Ms. Cynthia Albert Gunaratnam, Ministry of Health, Malaysia. Ms. Pua Wiling Angeline, Ministry of Health, Malaysia. And Mr. Sito, Ministry of Health, Cambodia. Now we have our remaining graduates who are not able to join us today in this auditorium, but nonetheless, most of them are also with us on the virtual platform. And they are Ms. Tracy Min Cindy, Mr. Lee Yu Cheng, Dr. Lim Yung Ping, Ms. Pang Jensen, Dr. Po Boon Ping Jeff, Ms. Tam Pui Man Tammy, Dr. Umaya Lakshmanan, and Mr. Wan Jamin Alfred. Congratulations once again to our graduates, and I wish you all the best in the career. Now may I invite Professor Silke Vogel for the closing remarks. Silke, please.
Thanks, James. And once again, congratulations to our graduating class of 2020-2021 and the successful completion of the Graduate Certificate in Health Products Regulation. This has been an extraordinary evening, and we are grateful to have this opportunity to commemorate Sir Alasdair and share our many memories of him. We also thank Professor Sir Farrar for readily agreeing to give the inaugural lecture and for his inspiring session. It is our intent to establish this lecture as part of CORE's regular event. Guided by Sir Alasdair's vision, the lecture series will serve as a platform to promote excellence in health regulatory and policy systems by addressing issues, challenges, and fast-evolving trends in the biomedical research and the healthcare ecosystem. As CORE is entering its 7th year, we continued in this vision to enable access to health products and bringing together key stakeholders from governments, NGOs, academia, and industry through education and our think tank. Looking ahead, our key strategic areas will focus on digital health, patient engagement, innovative therapies, clinical trials, medical devices, and vaccines. And as our advisory board chair, Dr. Margaret, eloquently shared in her speech, to enable CORE to continue making an impact towards access to good, safe, and effective health products, please consider supporting us by donating via our CORE campaign, #ThanksToYou. Visit our website or scan the QR code for more information. And with that, we conclude the live stream of this event. And again, thanks to all of you in Singapore and overseas who attended our lecture and graduation today. And stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vogel. We will now move into the final segment of the event, and may I please request for all of you to remain seated for the next 5 minutes while we take a group photograph with our graduating cohort. May we request Professor Mark, Dean Kaufman, and Professor Lim to join Professor Vogel on stage for the group photograph with our graduating cohort, please. May we also have our graduating cohort back on stage for the group photograph. Thank you very much, Professor Mark and Dean Kaufman, for being part of our graduation ceremony. May we invite you to take your seats, please. And with that, we have now come to the end of the evening. Thank you to each and every one of you for being part of the 2021 Inaugural Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture and Graduation Ceremony. We hope you have enjoyed the program over the course of this evening. And for our graduates, we hope you continue to be part of CORE's alumni journey and wish for you to join CORE's future events. Thank you all and have a pleasant evening.